windows and notes. I can't even begin to explain on how glad I am to be moving from the country. However, I cannot say the same for Jay. We were both 13, and we considered ourselves explorers, but that was our downfall. I had lived in the country for about 2 months in this little town, and had finally found a friend, Jay, to have over to play. Our house was an old farmhouse that had huge windows facing the back of the wide open pasture that we played in. One window, my bedroom one to be exact, had a pretty blue trim around it that had yet to fade and could be seen from the outside and faced the old red barn a couple of miles into the pasture. The barn had been there for what seemed like forever, and my dad had warned us not to go into it for fear we might get hurt. We, on the other hand, decided that we knew enough to not get hurt and decided to brave the death trap, as my dad called it. Jay and I had been going into that barn for months and nothing had happened to us yet, so we decided to get brave and be bold. Biggest mistake of our lives. We climbed up and into the hayloft of the barn and were messing around in the leftover hay when something caught Jay's eye. It was a piece of notebook paper. "Haley, come over here," she said, awestruck. I casually walked over to where she was standing. That little notebook page had the most beautiful drawing on it that I had ever seen. It was looking up from a point, and there was the side of a house. It was uncolored except one little thing. There was brilliant blue trim around a magnificent huge window. We just sat there for the longest time, staring dumbfounded at this paper, when finally Jay said, "Let's take this up to your room and hang it up." We jumped down from the hayloft and darted to the house and up into her room. "This is a really pretty drawing," I said, as Jay hung it up with the tack by my big window. "Sure is, dude, but doesn't it look familiar?" she asked. I had shaken my head, shrugging it off. Maybe if I would have thought about it more, things would have ended up different. She stared at it for a bit, I think trying to grasp a feeling of some sort that had entered my room that day, but was put off by my mom yelling at us to come eat our lunch. About a week later, Jay and I were up in the barn again, playing with a rope swing we had managed to hook up to the ceiling, when all of a sudden we heard a scream, and startled me so bad I let go of the rope, landing on my arm wrong. I remember drowning out the scream with my own, and Jay helping me to my house, panicking as she had searched the pasture, looking for the source of the other scream. While I was being attended to by my mother, Jay ran back to the barn to look for the screamer. My mom finished with my arm. It was a small sprain, and went to bed. I waited up for Jay to come back for about an hour. Finally, she burst in through the front door of my house, out of breath and pale as a ghost. "What the foo asterisk K happened, Jay?" I asked. All she did was extend her arm and open her hand. In her palm was a piece of paper. I grabbed it out of her hand and looked at it. What I saw petrified me to the bone. It was a drawing that portrayed my windowsill, looking out over to the barn, with what looked like two figures running to the house. But what really got me was the note at the bottom. "I see you from the inside out now, Kyokso. This isn't real, Jay. Be rational. Someone is just trying to creep us out." I grabbed her arm and Dr. Asterisked her up to my room. She squirmed and cried, but I was determined to prove her wrong, that there was nothing out there. We climbed to the top of the stairs. I let go of her arm and opened my door. Instantly, I felt an unnatural chill that made it feel like I was in Antarctica. I looked over my shoulder to see Jay had run downstairs. "Jay, no!" I sprinted after her as fast as I could. I saw her sprint around the corner and heard the slam of the back door. I grabbed a flashlight off the kitchen counter and made for the door, but before I could swing it open with my good hand, something caught my eye and froze me in place. By the door was the note that was previously taped in my room. I stared long enough to realize something had changed. What came next chilled my blood. Scrawled at the bottom it said, "Saying hi." I felt a breath next to my ear and stood still, unable to breathe. Then a low, clear voice whispered, "Saying goodbye." Then a blood-curdling shriek sounded from outside. I had felt frost that had coated me slide away and bolted out the door and into the night, searching and calling for Jay, listening for anything. I looked toward the barn and felt the frost bite again. I remember running into the barn shouting for her, crying for her to come out, anything at all, any sign. But as I collapsed from exhaustion, I noticed a piece of paper on the ground under the rope swing. I walked over, holding my breath, and reached for it, allowing myself to tremble in anticipation. As I turned the flashlight onto it, in my head I was hoping, praying this was a joke Jay had set up. But what I saw in the paper made my prayers turn to ash. I will never forget that feeling of dread and hopelessness that day. I had lost my best friend. To what? I do not know, and I bet I will never know. I am just glad to be out of that house, away from the barn, and as for the notes, well, I kept them, as a reminder as to what is to come and in memory of my friend Jay. You see, the last note had a picture and a saying. I'm actually looking at it now. It's just of the hayloft, our hayloft, and in the corner is scribbled, "We will meet again."
Thanks for joining us on Fright Scream. Remember, for more chills, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Until next time, sleep tight, if you dare.